Paul's
after.
coming in.
Oh, yeah.
Kevin, is Paul coming?
Doubt it.
Haven't heard differently.
Okay.
Okay, let's give him a minute. Let's give him a minute. And,
He would already be here.
Yeah, I haven't heard that he.
Just read and listen.
Somebody tall sat in my chair last. I can't.
As much as I'd like to speak, no, I shouldn't. That's how you get in trouble.
Everybody in the audience doing well? All right. Two residents and all staff.
We can like mix and match it up.
Mix and match? Oh, all right, sorry, missed you, sorry. Wow.
we need it, we need
We're
it.
just, we're honorary,
you kinda are.
honorary staff.
The amount of time you spend here.
Art, is that your assigned seat?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If somebody else is in it, we kick them out.
So I also haven't heard differently that Mr. Diaz will not be here, but we do have a quorum at this point, so we can start if you want
I'm
to.
just gonna send him a message real
Okay.
quick, and then we'll, do, moment of silence and pledge if we can, before we get started.
And then if he shows up, we'll just note when he arrives. Okay.
Commissioner Rand, you doing well? Yes. Good. Not bad for an old guy.
It's morning, he's here.
He's here.
What do you think? Should we just go ahead and get
Yeah.
going?
Yeah,
And
let's
then
get
we'll,
going and we'll
okay. All right, let me make sure my ringer's off, and, okay. Okay, so then for the record, we are in session. Welcome to City of Winter Spring City Commission Workshop of Wednesday, June 18th, 2025. And Tristan, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mayor Kevin McCann,
Present.
Deputy Mayor Cade Resnick,
Present.
Commissioner Paul Diaz, Commissioner Victoria Bruce,
Here.
Commissioner Sarah Baker,
Present.
excuse me, Commissioner Mark Caruso,
Here.
City Manager Kevin Sweet,
Present.
and City Attorney Anthony Garganese.
Great. If we could stand for a moment of silence to be followed by the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Clete, you ready? Let's see, just making sure there are no changes to the agenda. We're going to
sir.
roll right into the,
Not as I know of.
nothing from the dais?
I have one quick question. Is this being recorded?
Yes, ma'am.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important. This should be really informative. Looking forward to it. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor McCann, City Commissioners. Thank you for your time tonight. I'm Clete Saunier. I'm your Director of Public Works and Utilities. And I just want to extend a special thank you to you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to be able to come here today and hear what we have to say about our future needs assessment. We'll be presenting two different presentations. First presentation will be on our Utilities Capital Infrastructure Program with a 5-year look ahead, better known as a CIP program plan. And then at the end, from about 11 o'clock on, so we'll be discussing this from this time until 11, including a question and answer session. And then from 11 to 12, we'll be addressing the update on the East Water Reclamation Facility design and construction process, plus our intent to be going forward in our application for an SRF loan to get that kick-started in a funding, for a funding vehicle. Today, I've got our consultants with us. We've got Kimley Horn and Associates, Julia Felter, who is project manager, project engineer with the city for some time now. Carollo Engineers, we have Scott Richards, project manager, and Mira McKee, project engineer. And then we have Eric Anderson, our CMAR contractor. He is the CMAR project manager. So for the last several months, our dedicated staff and our consultants have done a deep dive review on a needs assessment of all the infrastructure within the city, utilities infrastructure. They looked at water, wastewater, and reclaimed water, and they put together a package that addresses needs throughout the city in terms of our infrastructure. That resulted in 31 projects totaling about $34 million that we plan to approach over the next 5 years. The city, we've discovered, has a lot of needs, and I know most of you front and center, you know that the reclaimed water plants are two of those critical infrastructure needs that expired in their service many years ago, several years ago. 2019, I believe, is probably when they were at their end of their run, but we're still maintaining those as best we can to be able to deliver wastewater, reclaimed water services for the community. And although we have a lot of needs, we're not alone. You know, throughout the United States, infrastructure, municipalities specifically, 80 to 90% are suffering and addressing critical infrastructure needs based on many, many years of deferred maintenance due to a variety of reasons I won't go into. But one thing that I did want to note is that the American Society of Civil Engineers, they publish their quadrennial report card. So every 4 years, they do an assessment of all the infrastructure throughout the United States, everything from airports to wastewater systems. And the overall grade of all of the infrastructure in the United States is running at about a C grade. Of those, drinking water received a grade of C minus, and also wastewater and stormwater a D plus. So we're not alone. There's a lot of needs out there, and there's a lot of funding needs as well. ASC estimates between those two different categories, there's $1 trillion, $999 billion in funding gaps between being able to get that accomplished. Much of our lobbying with the United States, with the federal government, you know, we're pushing and asking for more and more money each year. That seems to be kind of drying up lately. But the good news is City of Winter Springs is in a pretty good shape, both in funding and also needs assessment. The presentation that we're giving to you up front, the Utilities Infrastructure, Capital Infrastructure Program, it really does point toward, there are many items that have needs based on deferred maintenance, but we're also proposing a lot of projects that will actually enhance our service delivery for many years to come, even past 5 years. So I think you'll see that when we get into the presentations, you'll find, and hopefully you'll discover that although we have needs, we're not in as bad a shape as we may have thought we were, but we're going to put a plan together. We have put a plan together that gives people direction and guidance on when and where we'll be addressing these over the next 5 years. So with that, I would ask for ground rules. Let the speakers get through their presentations. Make notes of any presentation slide you'd like to come back and ask questions on. But let us get through that due to the limited time we have to get through 2 different presentations today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Julia, and she'll get us started.
And actually, just for clarification, and will we be able to get a copy of these slides after we're finished?
Yes, sir.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Hello, I'm Julia Felter. As Cleet mentioned, I work for Kimley Horn. This is going into our 5th year of being a consultant for the city. Some notable projects that we've done are the wastewater and reclaimed water master plan, the reclaimed main extension along 434, and lift station 7. I know I'm not as familiar to you guys as Scott and Mira are, so that's a little background on the projects that we've done for the city. Here's the agenda. As Cleet mentioned, we're going to talk about the CIP until about 11 and then move on to the update on the plan. So what is a capital improvement plan? This is probably your first presentation on the utility capital improvement plan. So it is a plan to help the city identify priority projects and cost to construct, collect data, land acquisitions, all of that, to then use as a tool to budget. We have gone out for about 5 years of needs, and you'll see that when we go through the priorities. This is a plan, and it has been prioritized according to today's needs. So as we move through the projects and the city changes and projects come up, this plan can modify and develop. Right now, though, what we're presenting is the plan for the next 5 years and how it aligns with the funding. So if funding becomes available, things can change as well. So before we look to the next 5 years, here's a little update on the current projects we're working on that fall under the capital improvement plan. We have a generator at Water Plant 3. We have a new lift station going in for the master lift station of 7 West, and some additional design projects for reclaim extensions and regulatory compliance. So these are our current 12 or so projects that we've been working on for the year 2025.
Well, they were asking us to wait
I
for
know.
questions.
And I know this is annoying, but I would have liked this in electronic form, so I could have been taken. Is there a chance we can get this printed?
Working on it right now.
Take notes as we go.
Yeah.
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 Sorry, not to be that annoying, but
It would be really helpful. Yeah.
thank you.
Oh, you got some? Oh, he's gonna get, okay,
Keep going.
thanks.
Okay,
So I guess
Thank you.
as you have that, I would want to take notes.
Yeah.
understood, no problem. So a notable project on here that you'll see on the next slide is the potable water main inventory and replacement plan. That is a proactive approach on getting ahead of water main breaks, aging infrastructure, and that is going to be a continuous line on the capital improvement plan. Right now, it's being paced at about $1 million a year. Like I mentioned, it's all dependent on available funding. So this is the potable water prioritized project list. As I mentioned, they are in priority as of today. Much shuffling is not in the current works due to funding restrictions. So main replacement project number 2, that results of a study that's going on right now. And then you'll see some other water main replacements, some to the system, and increased reliability for communication. That is a big all of the water, wastewater. That is something that is a major reliability issue focus as well. Another highlight on this one is the replacements. We have powered red meters. They get read once a month. The idea is real time, and that is a focus for the utility rate. Change out % of the next 4 years. Here is the wastewater priority projects. The plants are not in this list. This is all projects, those plant replacements. Station 5 East is on the list as well. There are current improvements, secondary pumps and power at that lift station. That was a project that was identified the master plan for wastewater, so it will be its time anyway. Then LC upgrades, that is something that was slated for 2020. We are pushing to get it started in 2025. So that's an example of priorities changing as the needs provide and come up with the city. Not least, we have reclaimed water expansions and improvements. a priority. Again, a lot of these, especially on the contingent on funding and available resources. Example of that would be Michael Blake Reclaiming Extension, a neighborhood from using potable water for irrigation to reclaim, submitted for multiple grants and support for those projects. Right now, it is not a high priority. Yes, it's in the next. It's just the funding does not align. So that's $23 a gallon of saved water. So, you know, so here's the summary of projects. As Cleet mentioned, there's 31 total projects identified for years, costing about $34 million. Here is the list of all of those 31 projects together, and you can see how they play out across the 5 years and how they're ranked in priority. Now, this is, again, a plan on how we would execute. Every year it could change again. So how are we gonna fund these projects? We were working with staff and came up with anticipated numbers and budgeted expenditures. So this is a high-level view of what we're anticipating for FY26 in terms of revenue from rates and funding from outside sources like SRF. So you can see the anticipated revenue is about 24 million, and the budget expenditures that will be submitted shortly are about 25. The updated CIP that's being reviewed today will be, or has been sent to Raftellus to include in the fee assessment, or the rate study assessment, that's being evaluated right now. And now we can open it for questions. I don't know if they want to pass out.
Okay.
Get the rest of it.
Well, it says questions, so you want to stop for questions on what we've just covered?
Just for what we covered, I apologize, I assumed, I know what that makes me. I assumed that y'all had copies of the packet. And so if you just give us a few minutes, I want to make sure you have those in your hands so you can kind of go back over them and review. I'd like to touch on some projects that are particularly important over the next 5 years. And get Julia to kind of tag team with me a little bit on kind of a going over, if you will, on each fiscal year, at least on the top priority projects and why we believe they are a top priority project within each of those classifications. So,
Okay, so with that being said, would you like us to ask questions, or do you want to run through
if you would
those
like to ask
first?
some questions, unfortunately, I gave my only copies to Matt to make some
So,
copies.
You got it.
So, but if you have questions, yes, we would like to answer these.
All right. Ladies first?
I'm good for a minute.
Okay.
All right, can we go back to the first water? Yes, okay, so, flow meter, sorry. Starting at the very top, right? You've got, looks like the very first most important project is flow meter replacement.
Yes.
From the way I'm reading that is we'll start in fiscal year 26, but it's going to take 4 years to complete the project?
Correct. Divide that number by 4.
Okay. Are we going to allocate that 6.9 into 26 budget, or is it going to be allocated into 26, 27, 28, 29's budget?
It will be divided by 4 over the next 4 years. So 26, 27, 28, 29 will have 1/4 of that total cost over 4 years.
And there's no way to do it faster than that? Or is it just because of money?
Because of the money.
Manpower.
So each year is about $1.7
No,
million.
that answers
so,
my,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just a couple things. I mean, the complexity of it, and nobody does water meter replacements in-house. I mean, it's outsourced, and just the ability to be able to do that. I've never seen a city, certainly a city with this number of customers, be able to do that in under 2-3 years. City of Sanford just is finishing up now their fourth phase. I think they had a 4-year plan. So, funding is one issue, but just the ability to actually physically be able to change out over 15,000 meters is a big undertaking. So typically, it's a 3 to 4 year
Thank you.
project initiation, depending. This one is long overdue.
No, 100%. My second question goes to the last two parts here. It says Advanced Water Treatment Study and Water Supply Plan, TBD. No, same slide. The very two pieces on the bottom.
Yes, sir.
There you go.
That also, no cost attached to it. So we've got 34 million, but what are those two pieces? Advanced Water Treatment Study and Water Plan, Water Supply Plan?
So those are studies and plans that are looking ahead to the future that will be coming down from regulatory agencies. It's TBD on time and cost due to the unknown extent of those studies, what will be needed for those requirements.
So then my next question, it says Advanced Water Treatment Study. Does that change how we are treating the water right now significantly? Because we've been working for the last at least couple of years that I've been up here to make sure we have the safest water.
So there are a couple contaminants that are coming into play from regulatory agencies that will not be enforced until the 2030, 2031 timeframe. So that study is to get ahead of those requirements and see what is needed to be modified at our current plants to meet those requirements.
And City Manager, when that comes across, that'll be additional dollars that we have to find. Will we budget for it? Will we kind of have an idea ahead of time?
Yeah, correct. I think over the next several years, they're still start identifying what those threshold levels will be. I think we have some pretty good ideas of what that's going to look like in the technology and what type of treatment is going to be required. Is still, this is a national issue, particularly as we're talking around PFAS and a number of other contaminants, and that's why I believe they've actually extended it 2 years from what the original requirement was to come into compliance, because of every water system in the country is facing these same issues. So absolutely, it's going to be budgeted and planned out once we kind of identify what the requirements will be and what the treatment requirements at the 3 plants will require.
I think it's important to note, and I think we would all agree, that as these new emerging and more knowledge is learned about PFAS and things like that, that Winter Springs is committed to staying ahead of, and although the curve, and making sure and ensuring that our drinking water standards and expectations of our residents are far ahead of the curve and not reactionary. We're not going to wait until they come along and say, oh yeah, and then try to respond and try to find finances to pay for them and things. We're going to have to stay focused on these things every year for the next couple of years and keep coming back to it.
I have one more question on this one. I just don't, we're good? Maybe the city manager, maybe you folks, Shayowa Boulevard, water main replacement, that's that whole long piece going down?
Correct.
Yes.
It looks like it will begin and finish in '26?
So that's the plan. Sorry, Clay, I don't know.
No, that's,
Off,
yeah, no, that is the plan.
You'll see
We're-
the water main replacement line item of that 5.9. If you recall, we have identified funding for that through 4th Gen.
Okay.
That's part of our 4th Gen spending plan.
Correct.
And that will be moving forward. We're currently, actually, our coming agenda on Monday is an approval for the design of the engineering design for that line, and we'll start construction and completion, which will also include ultimately final pavement of that road, which is much needed. But the idea would be in calendar year 2026.
Perfect, and you included pavement, and so we're looking at everything from the bridge down to 434,
It's 1.3 miles, everything north of 434.
to the bridge.
What's the name of the road?
To Shepherd.
Shepherd.
All the way to Shepherd?
All the way to
Yes.
Shepherd.
Okay,
So that just be sure, this is the water main replacement.
Yeah.
So that we can then talk about redoing the road. So this, I'm
Right.
sorry, on Monday, we will be discussing.
right, but
specific
this is that, one of those projects that I was trying to get, because this is the side of the road that's like this wide, but
Right.
water pools in there,
Right.
so this is great.
Just have to get this part done first so we can.
Yeah, the primary issue with that is the current depth of the existing line.
That's
Right.
what I was-
That would impact if we were to try to do any paving now.
Yep.
It's just not, so the first step is the design of that water line. There's been a lot of work leading up to this through surveys and evaluations, ultimately design, and 2026 is what's aimed for.
My question's on that blue sheet.
You good? Commissioner?
One question.
Yeah.
So the water meters, when they go in, what might be the margin of error on the accuracy as opposed to what it is now? Because I'm using myself, for example, my bill's about $100. When those meters go in, they're going to be 100% accurate on usage. Do we see a upper or lower in cost?
What you will see is that those folks that have up-to-date current meters will not be subsidizing those that aren't reading accurately right now. We're estimating between $500,000 to $1.5 million of revenue lost annually. So in 4 years' time, once these come online, we could see a significant revenue increase coming into our coffers so that we can do even more of these projects in a shorter amount of time.
But do we
But-
have somewhat of maybe a percentage of what it might be more?
Everybody's going to be different
Yeah.
depending on the age of the meter, but
True.
to answer your question on specifics, no, I couldn't tell you, but there is an average, otherwise we wouldn't be estimating between $500,000 and $1.5 million in revenue.
Yeah. And
I don't have
would
that on top of my head.
Would the
right.
meters also have the ability to tell if there's a leak in the house? So they'll get a notification right away, and that could be a savings as well.
Right now, there's about 15,000 of our meters out of 17,000 that are manually read or drive-by read, if you will. It's called RMI. There's a mixture of those. These will be full AMI to where they'll be communicating on a constant basis with a central collection radio antenna. That data is then driven into the cloud. Users will have access to it. The new meters will also eventually, when they're all installed, will be able to detect leaks not only in the service line, but even between services along our main line so that we can locate those breaks if we have a minor leak that is not detectable for a long time until the road starts caving in due to the moisture. It's a win-win for everybody, and it's something that's desperately needed. One of the other additional benefits of that is that staff requirements to go and manually read 15,000 meters, 17,000 meters a month, that would be reduced, and we'd be able to reallocate staff to more important, not more
Right.
important, that's the wrong term, but other things that are just as important.
Right, and that's why Duke went to the smart meters. They don't have to send people out.
Correct. Well, there'll still have to be rereads occasionally. Everything is,
Right.
it's not perfect.
Okay.
I think, then on that note, I think it's kind of important. So what he's talking about is anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million in lost revenue. You can also interpret that as
People's.
there's a lot of people not paying what they're supposed to be paying. And when we get all of these things done, there's some pros and cons here. First of all, we're going to have some upset residents who were not paying their fair
That's
share.
why I asked
Who's
if
going to come
we
up.
kind of know what the difference might be.
The positive, I guess, if there is a flip side, is that that accurate revenue and everyone paying their fair share should help offset the cost of this project. So it's, it is, and then the cost savings of all the labor and all of those other things and the efficiency of the system.
One of the reasons why this is our #1 priority project is for that very reason, to be able to supplement the future needs that we have to be able to construct, just to keep that deferred maintenance in check.
Yeah.
It is a double-edged sword, but I'm sure
it
it
should
is.
be fair. It's going to be hard for folks to argue
Yeah.
against fairness and accuracy.
But I just did a quick math based on 14,000 residents, there were 14,000 homes, it's $7.77 if it's every single person
Per year, per month?
per month. That's not,
Right.
And that could go lower or it could go higher a little bit.
Yes, some
That's your
people
average.
might actually save money, right? Who knows? But we'll see.
so,
Okay?
assuming it's all houses.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bruce?
Number 2, the water main replacement. Does this mean that all the drinking water piping will be replaced throughout the entire city?
No. Sorry, not for $5.9 million. Those projects are being identified off of the potable water inventory and replacement plan. And right now it's being paced at about $1 million a year. And that kind of equates to one large main per year.
And so these projects, these areas have been identified as the priority. There's been breaks, and if you replace the piping, it will make it new, so it won't be as damaged. Is that correct?
Yes, we're currently wrapping up that plan, and it was evaluated on material type, work orders in the system, and then historical data. We're talking with staff on how many replacements have occurred in certain areas, so that's how they were prioritized.
Okay. For the appropriations, I believe it was the aerators, the Winter Springs valve, and the waste treatment plants 1, 2, and 3 SCADA. So if we were able to receive those funds, I'm assuming we could bring up those projects from 2028 to 2026?
Yes, that is correct, if funds were received.
Yeah, just to add to that, Commissioner, so those 3 projects, as you stated, we're waiting on those appropriations. The Michael Blake reclaim extension total amount was $960,000, of which we've requested $760,000, so $200,000 would be what the city would need to fund if that appropriation is received. On the Winter Springs Boulevard valve addition, that was a $50,000 total, and we requested $40,000, which the city would have to match 10. And the public water trade, the aerator improvements at the 3 plants at $1 million, we requested $750,000 from state appropriation, and the city would have to match $250,000. So depending on those fundings, to Julie's point, you know, the prioritization of that, to be able to make sure that we were able to achieve that through the additional funding outside of reliance on the city would become a priority to make that happen.
Currently, our drinking water standards have always been at the threshold. So if, let's just say, if it's a value of 1 to 6, and 6 is the limit, we're at 6, which we go back to that grading I see as a D. Is there any way that we could provide any additional treatment structures to improve the standards? I understand that EPA has standards, but instead of being a C or D student, could we be an A or B student? Could we increase our standards?
I'd like to make something very, very, very clear. He was talking national standards that have those kinds of rates. We're not saying that we're not A.
I read the reports. I know our thresholds.
Yeah, cool. Just want to make sure.
Good morning, everybody. Scott Richards, Kroll Engineers. I think to give a little clarity on that, it's not a simple one answer piece. I would say from a water quality, I would say I think we're doing better than we realize compared with the community.
Is there a way to do it? And what could you do?
There's always a way. I would say the challenge I think you're probably describing has historically been stuff like THMs, right? Disinfection byproduct we talked about on the threshold of that scale you speak of. A lot of that's in the CCR that just came out or is coming out here with the annual water quality update. A lot of those are a nature of where we live and the water coming out of the ground, right? Certainly if you want to put reverse osmosis or something extreme across the city, can be done, but then that creates other challenges, right? Disposal of brine, pieces that go along with that create other challenges, if, for instance, to the wastewater treatment process at the wastewater plants. I think some of the other subject you may be kind of touching on a little bit is upcoming regulations, right? So part of what the CCR will touch on, and you touched on it earlier, the UCMR, unregulated contaminants required report monitoring by EPA nationally. This is every utility across the country. We're just completing testing for UCMR 5, which is the 5th round of UCMR that's come out over the past 2 decades. Some of the hot issues in that are PFAS and PFOA, your Teflons and nonstick coatings and stuff like that that are in the water.
No, I'm talking about
So-
regulated contaminants, like lead or, you know, all of them. I don't have the papers in front of me.
Hey, everybody. Commissioner Bruce, I think what you're looking at, I have the CCR pulled up here.
Thank you.
So you're seeing the range of results listed, and that's the range of sampled results that the city of Winter Springs sampled for. And then in a column next to it, it will say level detected, and they'll always put the highest level out of those ranges. So that's not the drinking water standard, that's just the city's range of results. So you need to compare the level detected column to the MCL, which is the maximum contaminant level, and you'll see we're below it for everything. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, so I think you can look at individual items as she's got shown in the CCR, and I would say the most part of them were actually well under the threshold. Some of them are, you know, I think the one you had up was like 0.12 out of a 2, right? So well under the threshold. I think the common challenges I noted on is stuff like disinfection byproducts, and that's just the nature of the groundwater. As I say, we're close to the river. There tend to be a lot of organics in the water that tend to react, but the city has been well within the threshold now for a good 3-4 years at a minimum, and I know we've given presentations in the past kind of showing the trends of that, and we've been consistent and not had any problems with that for many years.
Thank you.
It was a heavy lift getting there, but thanks for the work you did.
Scott, I'll follow up on that really fast to follow up from that question. In what we are currently doing, is there more we can do to improve beyond reverse osmosis or something like that?
So I'll break that into 2 elements. I think you touched on it earlier in the question. So there's the aerator item is really looking at taste and odor, we'll say, right? The aesthetics of water. Those aren't necessarily going to remove what I'll call hard contaminants from the water, right? But that's a taste and odor element that we're looking at really to further improve on that aspect. I would say the data we've had has been very positive. The future regulations or coming regulations that are out there is what may change the dynamics for, frankly, every utility in Florida. The PFAS, the PFOA, these other contaminants, and it seems like about every 5 years the EPA identifies some new contaminant that's in the water, right? And frankly, that's never the utility's fault, and I'm speaking globally here, right? It's something that some industrial facility, or frankly, a lot of it's already been through us, right? It's on hamburger wrappers and things like that, or cups that you drink out of that have a lining on it, and it makes its way long-term through us and back into the groundwater or by other means. So those regulations, to me, are what's coming. The next one has been established for UCMR 5, mainly focused on PFAS and PFOA. Originally had a target of 2029. It's been pushed to 2031 with the new administration. So every administration, things change a little bit, but those will be some of the key targets in our view that could lead to further treatment requirements. I will say from what we've seen from the city, again, we're in the very early testing of that and monitoring down to individual wells. The testing we've seen has been right on, or in some cases right over the threshold. And we're talking parts per trillion here. We're not talking, you know, as of 5 years ago, you couldn't even measure this stuff, right? So the labs and stuff are trying to come up with ways to measure what's in the groundwater. So basically the threshold was set by EPA at the lowest level that can even be measured. So just to give you a feeling of how dilute this is in the water. Nevertheless, there's a regulation that's been established. Typically, right now it's at 4 parts per trillion. Some of our wells have been in that 3 to 5 range, right? So we're right on that edge. To put it in perspective, South Florida is getting the same stuff in the levels of the 30s, right? So much different challenges right now where they're immediately looking at stuff like RO and other advanced treatment methods to be able to remove it. We think in your case, from what we're seeing early on, this is going to be more of a managed, it may be as simple as modifying some of the wells, right? It may not require advanced treatment right off the bat. If we can look at other ways of fixing the source that we're grabbing from, would be a much easier approach than putting in reverse osmosis, say, across the city, right? So that's the stuff that we're looking at as we get this data and as the regulations also continue to the target continues to move, right? So we're trying to be aware of those potential changes.
In reverse osmosis, we're potentially talking about tens of millions of dollars for those types of projects.
And to be honest, I know Corolla is specifically looking at a lot of treatment processes, and frankly, we try to avoid RO because there's other natural, better processes, and part of the issue with RO is the reject. And what do you do with the reject? And then it goes to the plant. And that salty water, when you put a brine together, tends to upset the plant process, right? So there's a lot of pieces that have to go together in those situations.
Then you just mentioned something that's news to me. So the Trump administration is now, that's hot news. It's gone from 2029 to 2031.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And so
That's big news.
it's
actually.
always news day by day, right, of what's happening, but we've been monitoring it closely. And to be frank, that the date that was put out there was unachievable for the majority of utilities, because when you look at the process of identifying the issue, coming with design, getting a contractor and buying all this equipment is a long process. So I think they've recognized that. It's been pushed back 2 years. I wouldn't be surprised if it changes again, to be honest, right? There's so many utilities that are facing challenges much greater than what we're looking at here.
Right. Does not mean we take our eye off the ball. Doesn't mean that we
Yeah.
don't continue to work on it, but, okay. And make sure that we're in full compliance.
And I'll say it's very early, right? We're publishing, that data's in the CCR. We're publishing all that data, but this is our first 2 grabs at some of this data have just been completed, and we're still getting better refined data. In fact, we're taking additional data, right, beyond just what's required, so we can understand sources and points and potentially help come up with a solution that's more cost effective.
Okay. I have questions.
Go ahead.
Is that okay? So if we go to the proposed 5-year improvement plan budget, where it lays out the 34 million. Okay, so what
Per
we.
year? Okay.
Right, and then, we're only gonna stop here for a second, then we see, so that's the total 5-year CIP. The fiscal year 26, if we bring that down, we'll see 10 million down at the bottom. Okay, next slide. If we can just kind of, I guess what I'm hoping to do is clarify. So, anticipated revenue in fiscal year 26, 18 million from user charges, SRF design loans. Those are already accounted for. Those SRF design loans are for wastewater treatment plants. So we really, the wastewater treatment plants are not in that page before. So they should probably not be here, I might argue. Because, right, we're not talking about wastewater treatment plants. So that brings, so that still shows, so user fees are the 18 million. But then the budgeted expenditures in 26. So again, we know 10 million in CIP. When we see operating, so it's going to cost, we're going to bring in 18.6 from user fees. We're going to, just to keep the doors open, is going to cost us 13 million, 12.7. So that leaves us, whatever that's going to be about $6 million in projects and equipment. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that
Okay.
is one of the points that we would like to hit on, and I jumped over that point.
Sorry.
Yes, there is about, can you go to the full breakdown? To your quick math, there's about $6 million available to address what we had on our priority list of $10 million. So there are items on this list that will not be completed in the 26 year.
Okay. Now, we do have, and then there's other confusing things. We know that we did, the governor is signing the budget finally. We're still a little quite unclear of exactly what appropriations we got, but it does look as if we did in fact get 3 appropriations. The dollar amounts are a little, but what we can get into that once we have hard answers. I've got some emails that are out right now and text messages saying, hey, where do we stand exactly? That might skew these numbers a little bit. They might
Correct.
help,
Yep.
but they also might move a different project further up into 26 instead of what might be in 27.
Excuse me. I would note that the $3.3 million project for Shioa, that's a 4th-gen project. I don't believe that was included in this breakdown.
Ah,
Okay.
So that is
So there,
funded
there
through
is,
fourth
there's
gen.
certain
Oh,
there's
that
certain
sounds good.
projects in there. We didn't want to, we weren't going to get into a real deep dive. This is more of a needs assessment, let you know what our needs were. As a
Okay.
matter of fact, finance was a little hesitant even presenting these at this point because they're still dependent on the Reftelis rate review, which we're currently in. We also have limited knowledge on what Woodard and Kern's going to charge us for the operations and maintenance contract. We're still in the process of putting together and negotiating. So there's some big unknowns out there. So this was just to give you kind of a snapshot, not to make any real decisions moving forward until we get a finer tooth comb on this.
Thank you so much. I saw a $5 million deficit in the first
No,
year, and my heart was
We're a little closer to
fluttered.
that if
Okay.
you were to deduct.
Okay,
Like I said, at least that one main project is 3.3 million in fourth gen.
thank you for clarifying.
Cleet, one last question, Cleet.
Yes.
Drinking water. So what could we tell the residents that we have projects ongoing right now that's going to improve the quality of the water, smell and taste, you know, within the next year, 2 years possibly? What are we doing that we could say this is going to get better?
Fiscal year '28 would be the tray aerators.
Right.
That would be a direct benefit for water treatment plant 2 and 3. That could speed up a little bit if we get that funding we were talking about just a while ago.
Right now, it's a
But
hot topic right now with drinking water.
it is, but if you will look at the list of projects above that, that really points to the integrity of the system and just being able to deliver water to them. The water that we are distributing right now meets EPA requirements. It's in compliance. There's a little fuzziness there with the PFAS, PFAS that Scott had just mentioned, but it's not of a, it's still within nominal guidelines to be able to provide fresh drinking water. So there is some aesthetic issues perhaps with some of the water. We're sensitive to that. We recognize that. That's why it's on the 5-year plan. But based on all those projects before it, we believe that those are a much higher priority. Critical needs. Shoah Boulevard is one of those. That's a critical infrastructure project where it's all made of asbestos cement pipe that has been outdated and needs to be replaced. If you look at it, it will break. It's that sensitive.
Wow.
I mean, I'm exaggerating.
Yeah.
But you get the idea.
When will the next possible report be out on the quality? I know we get a
We
report.
just got one.
When's the next one?
Not until the end of this calendar year. They'll do the 2025 report about this time next year.
Okay. Thank you.
And maybe for anyone that's listening, there are copies of the water quality report, the latest one that are right here in City Hall, that they're sitting right outside of customer service on the counter.
Correct. And I also believe they all received a buck slip with a Q code that takes you to the actual report.
And then just to be crystal clear, Clete, you brought a lifetime of experience in this industry to Winter Springs. Thank you for all the work you've done, you all have, and Corolla and all of our other partners. Very clearly, our water quality, in your opinion, is safe.
It's excellent.
It's excellent, is the word you used.
I mean, I've been to several different communities across the United States. I don't want to go into the bad things that I've experienced there, but in comparison, your water's great.
And then what we're talking about in the 2028 aerators are simply improving the taste and smell. It is not making major changes to the safety of the water. This is more of aesthetics. It's taste and smell is the goal here.
Which
We
is important.
we do not have to worry about the safety of our water. That is not the issue we're talking about.
That is not the issue
Thank
not
you.
that I'm seeing.
Okay, important to know. Yes, sir.
A couple things. One, when the budget was signed, the appropriations are there. They went to the governor's desk. It's up to him to sign, yea or nay.
So it's my understanding, and I apologize, let me double check.
No, you're good.
I'm talking to Tallahassee as we kind of on the fly. So there were
Yeah,
three
that's what it is.
appropriations that we
Yep.
asked for.
All-
Hold on.
All three did go forward.
All three went forward. One, what are the final numbers? As long as the governor does not veto.
Correct. So that's what we're waiting for, is the governor's decision.
Yeah, it's still up in the air. It sounds as if we were approved for all three of the appropriations, but one of them was only half funded.
Correct.
And so we'll see exactly which is which.
Moving parts.
Okay,
All right, I
moving
still
parts.
have the 2 pages from here, if I can ask a few more questions.
To reclaim?
The wastewater prioritized project list by
Oh.
fiscal year?
Wastewater, okay.
Yep. So, City Manager Cleet, as you guys have come in, significant number of lift station upgrades on this form here. Now, we know we have the plants to change, but we have upgrades. I'm not asking how bad they were. I'm asking that as we look through these, this is just a small portion of lift stations, because this is a specific lift station 5, lift, you know, right. Is this what we need throughout the whole city in the next 4 or 5 years?
So there are specific lift stations called out based on the master plan, and then
Right.
there are lines like lift station upgrades and
Correct.
resiliency and redundancy that applies to current needs. So if there's a lift station, whichever number, that needs a generator or bypass pump, then that money gets allocated to that lift station. It's
Right.
as the priority comes up, so that all lift stations are in contingent to be upgraded. It's just as they become the priority. So there is money in the CIP to do 3 or 4 pumps and generators a year, and line replacements as well.
Which I appreciate. Here's my question, and it's $2.25 million for 5 years for resiliency and redundancy lift stations. We are, at least as we change to the new wastewater treatment plants, are we maintaining the old lift stations, or are we going to the modernized lift stations in some and old in other, City Manager, that it's kind of a little bit of put and take?
Yes, and we're currently doing lift station with the 7W. It's going through a major upgrade. Just to add to that, one of the things that we're still in the queue for is actually lifting the lift station. So we have 12 lift stations that have been identified to actually raise or lift up that are part of the HMPG hazard mitigation, HMGP hazard mitigation grant program.
Okay.
And we're still in queue for FEMA on those that we have not received approval yet. And that would be, all part of that redundancy and trying to make sure that the lift stations throughout the city are adequate and fully functional.
Right, because that's one of our big issues with hurricanes,
Yes.
is as they come
Yep.
through, then those go down, which then
And
causes.
there's 12 of those that have been identified.
Cool. Now, my last question on this page, in fiscal year 30, we've got a septic to sewer study. How much septic do we still have in the city?
There's about a little over 1,000 units of septic tanks in the city.
In the city? Does the state still have the program, or has that gone away where they would cover the cost of transitioning?
We have applied for program funding through that program and has not been awarded. So
Okay.
there is a submittal portal, but to the HMGP point as well, it has not come back down to us.
Most of those that we've looked at, we just don't meet the demographic for a lot of those grant and fully funded and loan forgiveness type of things to try to do that. But obviously, we continue to look at it, identify other sources. But most of those that are generally have been tied to just the makeup of the communities and the demographic of the community that we generally don't qualify for.
Okay. On that page, I have no more questions on that page.
Me either.
Anybody else?
Please, move on.
Okay, next page on the reclaimed. So, a lot of conversation, if you happen to be anywhere on social media, is we have 2 issues, drinking water and reclaimed water. We know we're changing the plants. When we take a look at this list here, right, there's a significant amount of money talking about transitioning from drinking water to reclaimed water lines. And Clete, this might be you as city manager. When we talk about the cup, after we get through fiscal year 30, how much of this transition on this page will lower the cup from potable water to drinking water to
So the projects on this list, you can see there's approximate gallons saved per day on 2 of the projects. So as you can see, it's only about 63,000 gallons a day could be offset by the 2 projects identified, which is pretty minimal, right?
Yeah.
Those neighborhoods have been identified of already having separate meters and separate irrigation piping. So for us to go into other neighborhoods that are using irrigation or using potable water for irrigation, it's going to be a lot more money to put the third pipe in the ground, change over their meter systems. So we've been identifying neighborhoods that already have the infrastructure and reaching for those first, and then trying to figure out how to fund the rest.
So realistically
It's difficult.
speaking, because yes, these areas were recently built. For whatever reason, we didn't connect them, but so be it. 63,000 gallons is not a lot.
Correct.
All of Tuscarora, Oak Forest, all those areas,
Parkstone.
Parkstone. Is Winding Hollow included?
Part of Tuscaloosa.
Part of it, right. And
Winding Hollow is on reclaim.
it is. So would that make a significant difference for us when it comes to consumptive use permit? If we changed everybody reclaimed, or is that just,
Right now, it's minor and it does take a lot more funding to convert them,
okay,
to make a bigger dent in that.
okay.
But I would also note that our cup is a limiting factor, and we do need to do everything we can, even if it is at incremental levels such as
Sure.
this. The cost per gallon is excessive.
Right.
But it's necessary in some instances.
And that's where I'm getting at, is I'm not disagreeing with what you have
Okay.
here. I'm wondering how much more we need to do to lower that cup, whether it is the cost of us going through Tuscarora to repipe Tuscarora, or go to Parkstone and repipe Parkstone, or,
I think once we get our residential meters recalibrated, we might be able to see an improvement just in the overall numbers that are being recorded on a regular basis against the cup.
okay,
That's a possibility.
okay. Commissioner, you go ahead, because I have a few more questions, but you go ahead.
Okay. Just regarding the cup, I believe we're up for renewal in 2027, but how does that renewal happen with St. John's River Water Management District? Is that just all unknown on if they'll give us the same or less?
So we've
Use.
actually been meeting as a group twice a year for the past 2 or 3 years now, meeting with them on our water conservation efforts, our converting people from reclaim, or from potable to reclaim, and having that discussion about cup limits. So we're proactively meeting with them before the permit renewal process.
It does appear as if we have a very solid relationship with St. John's. And it's also important to note when we're talking with DEP and St. John's and all of the other state regulating agencies, that we are good players, that we kind of share and work with all of them, and they do understand environmentally the single biggest, if I think I can say this, the single biggest issue is replacing these wastewater treatment plants and doing some of these priority lists. And we're sharing these priority lists with them, and we're getting their buy-in. So although the cup is an important issue, and trying to, what we're seeing is priority lists that we've shared and we've discussed with our other partners, and we're all working together to make sure that we're moving forward with the most reasonable thing that we can do, making sure that we're working with the funds that we have available, continue to chase state and federal funds, but working through this and communicating it with the residents and the dais.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at our last in-person meeting at St. John's, they were, very favorable towards the city's efforts. And, as Julia pointed out, certainly been keeping them in the loop where we're at, and the relationship has been great, and they've been very supportive. And, realizing that we are facing those issues around the cup, but our goals and initiatives, that they've been very pleased with the efforts that the city has made.
Couple more questions if I can. So go back to the cup conversation. I don't know the logistics here, but we've talked about Parkstone for a couple minutes. Is there, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but are there two separate documents for the cup? One includes Parkstone as a separate entity. Do you know this? And would it be in our best interest to communicate to build that cup percentage, or that makes no difference here? Scott, I guess that's you. You jumped up.
Yeah, just to add a little bit on that. So your potable cup and the Parkstone cup are separate items.
Okay.
The Parkstone number is kind of tied into the reclaim intake system.
Okay.
It's more specific to reclaim water, not to your potable water. So they are, while there may be an indirect relationship, they are not directly tied together.
So the Parkstone cup is attached to the old augmentation plant?
Yeah, and it's really the augmentation cup, for the record. I don't want to skew, but that
Okay. 'Cause then that's my
artesian
next
feature
question
is
is on it.
factored into that.
Okay. So while you're up here, all of you, my last question revolves around the Lake Jessup augmentation plant. For us to need this, yet we wait till fiscal '29, I don't know if that's the rebuild or the start of design. When would be the start of design to rebuild this?
That FY '29 includes design and construction of repairs that haven't been identified. So part of the design would be evaluating what repairs need to be completed, what repairs need to be completed and the cost of those repairs. It's an estimate right now as well.
So the 2 years that it talks about would start in '28, finish in '29, or start in '29, finish in '30?
It should be 29 and 30.
Okay.
The big table at the end shows the years that the funding is allocated and how it's split.
So you got 100,000 in '29 and 1.28 million to actually build it in '30. Would this not be something just as important to move earlier, city manager? Just because it deals with our wastewater, or as we build the wastewater plant, or no?
So I would add, this is a tough one, right? Because it's, the intake is very weather-driven.
Yep.
Right? So as the reclaim system grows, the drive and the need for that will also grow with it.
Right.
Because we're producing, the plants, new plants, doesn't necessarily change the volume of water we're treating. Now, I'll argue the new plant should more consistently produce quality water to go to the reclaim system. So if anything, the new plants would give us better consistency for the reclaim supply without needing Lake Jessup.
Okay.
Where Lake Jessup really comes in is March, April, May, maybe into June, right? The dry times of the year, everyone's using reclaimed water because the lawns are dry and it's not raining. And that's when that supplement really comes into play. We've been tracking that. I know this year we had a few weeks there when it was right on the edge of kind of running short of water. But then it started raining and things pick up. So it's hard to put it's almost like being the weather person here, right? It's really hard to predict when those needs truly come in. But I would say the consistent driver for me is that need for Lake Jessup goes hand in hand with your reclaim system expansion, right? So as you add more customers, that means more demand during that dry season is going to enhance the demand for Lake Jessup.
Which is why I'm asking why it should be the last thing we do. As we add more customers, would be done 26, 27.
I think, well, maybe I should let you answer, but.
So the augmentation plant is currently rated for 0.25 MGD, which is about 15% of your current reclaim. It would increase your reclaim or irrigation capacity by about 15%. Rolls back into adding users to reclaim is going to take more effort beyond the already plumbed communities. So the demand is only going to be growing based on new developments that will connect to existing reclaim and irrigation lines. So as development and demand increases with new growth, that's when we would start monitoring this to bring it up in the calendar years.
Right, and so my question is, there is going to be new growth coming in with us adding these other communities already on task in 26, 27, 28, that then we wouldn't actually finish this till 29. So there will already be more communities added, and this would be the last piece. So I'm wondering why this augmentation plant is the last piece when it can hold 15% if we are going to be bringing in all these communities. Does my question make sense, or did I lose it?
I think it sounds as if, and correct me if I'm wrong, so it sounds to me as if the infrastructure to get it to those new communities isn't there. So if we add it, not only that, the Lake Jessup augmentation plant primarily serves Central Winds Park, but even if we have the we don't have the infrastructure to send it to these new communities. We don't have the pipes in the ground yet to send it there. So why spend the money now when the infrastructure to send that product to those neighborhoods isn't there?
So, like
Exactly.
Scott alluded to, we are monitoring the increase in demand, and we have offset tables as we do move these potable users to reclaim. It's still about timing and then return of investment. So that 1.3
3.
to provide about 1.25 MGD is hard math, but you're looking close to like $20 a gallon. So that's also what we're considering, is the amount of money to take to improve these structures, connect to residents, offset, is the rate of investment and priority pressing. It's really, there's many factors, and it's chicken before the egg situation as well.
Which I understand. So I'm going to try to share with everybody my weird brain, right? Yes, we might use it for central winds, but in those months as well, there's a significant amount of grass usage and whatnot, but then that also offsets what the residents are doing, because if we get to March, April, May, June a little bit less, if you go look at our ponds, they're almost empty. But we're pulling this out of Lake Jessup. So my question is, now we're going to add on, let's say, 400 Winter Springs Village alone. So we're looking at, 400 new users.
There's a couple.
Right.
There's a couple of projects.
Right. So that 15%, my only question, and this is just for people to marinate on, is should this priority also be moved earlier in time to align earlier? That's my only question.
Vice Mayor Resnick, good question. I'm not trying to disregard anything that you're suggesting at all.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that based on the prioritization in this schedule,
Yep.
the Lake Jessup plant is a priority.
Yep.
It's on the 5-year plan, and I think that as funding becomes available, we're able to get, like, for instance, the forest controls. That's a balancing issue between the east and west side of the city.
Yeah.
Right now, we're having a lot of problems with how the system's being operated. That'll be resolved October 1, hopefully. We're having a lot of issues with valving and placements in the system to be able to balance the water. So getting it from point A to point B, we feel, is a little bit bigger priority than adding to the system now.
Fair.
So that doesn't mean that we can't advance that project a little more in advance if we can get to these others in a more rapid manner.
Fair.
Okay?
My one last question for everything here, City Manager, is will all this be outsourced, or will it be using inside staff?
All of,
The projects?
The large I'm sorry, were you asking him?
You're the boss.
Large infrastructure projects are going to be outsourced. We do try to do as much internal operations as we can on some of the minor projects, but for all intents and purposes, everything on this plan is outsourced.
Thank you.
Cleet or Scott, you could probably answer this. What other sources are we looking at possibly for water instead of what we're just getting right now, like outside sources? Anything that you can think of off the top of your head, how we can get more water to the city? Because I have a thought, and I'll throw it out to you after.
So there's a lot of discussion happening really within the district, and the district, St. John's really has a lot of input on these things. Certainly, before we look outside, the district, as it kind of alluded to earlier, is looking at conservation, reclaim, offset. Are you managing the best with what you have? That's certainly a key avenue. The districts as a whole, really 2025 is kind of a key year as part of the CFWI program, where they're looking at all those values and per capita and all that. So in our eyes, this year is kind of a big year to kind of help make sure everyone locks in some of those consumptive use permits that they have. More to your point, we have heard some bits and pieces of the district looking long-term at more regional solutions, right? This has happened in Polk County. This is happening in Jacksonville right now. There are things being floated out there that may include, a lot of times it's pumping and piping water, but there's also theories about impacts to certain streams and lakes. That's ultimately what's driving the consumptive use permit, right? If you're certain components, certain areas that the drawdown from the wells are impacting these critical streams. I know the one up near where I live actually is one of the bigger areas out by Yankee Lake where there's some big concerns about drawdowns of lakes. What the district is, at least in the early phases we kind of here looking at, maybe some broader picture, regional solutions where there may be some, hey, if there's a solution 20 miles away from here that may impact your cup in a positive way, and it becomes more of a holistic, multi-utility look at a solution. But it's very early because we're just hearing bits and pieces of this discussions.
Okay, so I know all of us are aware of it, and I'm just going to come out and say it, but we have a community here that we all know about, Parkstone, that has these artesian wells. How could we benefit from that? Why are we not benefiting from it when this community is literally willing to give the water to the residents for free? So that's a big topic.
You want to take that, or you want me to take it?
I would like you to take it,
Yeah.
Scott, from the professional.
I'm happy to give
I
a-
mean, I've
yeah.
been there, I've seen it.
Yeah.
We hear things that it's anywhere from 300,000 gallons a day to 1.2 million a day. So I've spoken to St. John's about it, I've spoken to other entities about it. We need to put this to bed already, and if we're gonna get it, let's get it. If not, at least the community's gonna know that we made every effort to do that.
Yeah, so I think we're going on 4 or 5 years on this subject, to
Right.
your point. We've had direct conversation with the district about this. I know we had a scope years ago to actually look at this, to kind of start things off. We all use the term, including us, artesian well. We truly don't know what it is, right? There's been a lot of discussion. In fact, some of the folks at the district do not believe it's a well. They actually believe it's what we call a fracture, and that's that natural, I'll call it down by the river type situation where you've got artesian pressure from the area that's popping out. So there's a lot of theories out there on what it is and how it is, and we understand when it was developed, it was basically whatever it was. They essentially took a manhole and kind of put it upside down on it to capture that water through the development and carry it to the stream. Now, that's kind of beyond your question, but it's a little history. What we initially were going to look at was trying to understand what that feature is and how can you capture it, right? From a permitting perspective, the district, unless there's proof this is some kind of deep well that is actually coming out of a valuable resource, if it's a superficial well, which is what we believe it is, even if it was from an old celery field, there is not a lot of value in it from a trade-off and impact to the consumptive use. From a direct treatment perspective, I've been there as well. It's very high in sulfide, especially with its location. It smells like rotten eggs coming out. Would
Like
require a lot.
reclaimed water does.
It would require a lot of treatment. But as the district sees it, it's a value from a reclaim perspective, from an offset there, not so much of a value from a potable perspective. Now, we had looked early on, is there some kind of, some ability here? And some of the early discussions we were looking at were actually trying to determine what the source was. Is it truly a well, or is it some fracture? Because if it was an old casing of a well and you could stop the flow, was what was being proposed. Could we stop the flow and then utilize that potentially to help offset other elements? That was where the value was being looked at. So again, there's a lot of moving parts on that one that tie in, and the district has a lot of opinions, and we've had several discussions with them on that. But there's not in our eyes, a value to direct treat it into the potable water system, right? That would
Well,
require.
I mean, we could use it for reclaim. We don't have to use it for drinking.
And it could be.
And it's free.
Right. The challenge with the reclaim side is, as we touched on earlier, you need Lake Jessup really between March and maybe June, right? So you could supplement that water source for 2 to 3 months out of the year, but the rest of the year, you would basically just let it flow into the river like it is today. And some of the conversation has been, well, yes, that supplement helps you, but doesn't offset those peak needs that happen for those few months, so you still need the intake on the river. So then it really comes down to a conversation of, is it better to let it come in the river and pull water directly out of the river as it's designed today and just treat it at the rate? Or do you repipe that over to the intake that we currently have to effectively dilute the river water?
Gentlemen, please. Gentlemen, sorry, it's really distracting if you hold on. Finish your sentence.
So if you,
No, sir. Hold on, we're in the middle of a meeting. Thanks.
so there would be a technical consideration, right, of how it's permitted today. Again, water goes into the river. We pull out a couple 100 yards downstream from the river for the intake. So that's how the permit was really written, right? It's a little bit circular, but in theory, that water going in was kind of considered as an informal offset to your current intake, right? It's like drinking out of one glass of water and then refilling it with a pitcher, right? You're drinking out of the pitcher at the end of the day. That was how it was looked at one level. The consideration from a technical and engineering point, again, which we did not get through, that mainly because of Hurricane Ian that flooded the intake at the time, would be, is that water being pumped over to the intake beneficial enough that it saves costs on the treatment process, right? Because that's effectively the difference. If I'm going to dilute that water with some total GPM, say it's, for all intents and purposes, if it's 400 gallons a minute, right? And you need 2,000 gallons a minute off the river, then you basically have,
I'm sorry. Gentlemen, would you take the conversation outside, please? It's very distracting. Thank you. I'm really trying to hang on what you're saying because I think it's
So
important.
it really becomes a dilution perspective, right? And just repiping that over to the intake add value and cost savings on the treatment, effectively the filter system. That's where the dollars and cents come in. From a permitting perspective, in our mind, doesn't really change much, right? You're still looking at the same water, is how are you getting it there?
Has there been any measurement testing to see exactly how much is possibly coming out daily?
No, not from us. We had a scope, I think it was several years ago that we were here to do. And then I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but I know at the time we were told not to come into the community to do any data collection at that time.
I think I'd like to forward to each of the commissioners. I think this is very valuable historical written paper. Form your own opinions. What I have here, unfortunately, I know Christian's out. I just forwarded to his email. We have 4 documents here. One was the city approved a $126,000 study with Corolla. And then you had a $33,000 contract with CCI to study this fissure, well, whatever it is, to see how the city could use this water and what was the flow and all those things. These 2 contracts were signed in February of 2022. In April of 2022, an attorney representing Parkstone sent us a cease and desist order. That order has now been sent to the clerk's office. I'd like you to see it. The city has historically, over and over and over again, attempted to reach out to Parkstone, and we have been notified by legal counsel from the HOA board that we were not allowed to set foot on that property. These are facts. These are all in writing. Then in November of, I have it here, but anyway, the county then, the HOA board then went to the county, asked the county if they would do some work on it, if they would be interested in buying this water or using this water. They were also reaching out to other communities, seeing if they wanted to buy the water, bypassing Winter Spring, ignoring all of the offers of help and the investments that we offered to make. Again, all in writing here, folks. The county then did say, hey, why not? Let's take a look at it. They did a study. The study was issued, I believe it was January of 23. Let me be, Jacobs Engineers, very specifically, and you all will have a copy of this. I'm having it forwarded to you. Let me read this very quote unquote. Jacobs' recommendations to the county. Jacobs recommends that the county not move forward with this project due to historical record of unsuccessful attempts to plug the well by other entities, potential for artesian groundwater flow to emerge at another location within Parkstone, and major disruption of the Parkstone community during exploratory and construction work. The problem is if we touch this, now, I'm not saying we don't. Let me be very clear. I'm not saying that we don't move forward once again and try. We can try, but if we touch this well, that they have unsuccessfully attempted to repeatedly cap, if we own this, when it takes out that pool, when it takes out that house, when it starts tearing up all of those roadways, all the residents of Winter Springs now own that problem. That is an unknown that must be resolved before we move forward. And when we've tried to do the studies, they don't want us to do the studies. We must not do this work or take on this responsibility without understanding what this liability is going to do to all the residents of Winter Springs. The county's done the study. It was told, don't touch it because of the liability. We've attempted to do these studies. We've been told to pound sand. I'm not telling you we don't do it. I'm not saying that we do it. I'm just saying we must move forward with significant caution if we do it. The liability it's unknown. Let's just say that. It's unknown, sir.
Just to continue from what you're saying, so when City Manager Sweet came on board, you know, I could not get, and you saw it, you were up here, the prior commissioners kept telling the prior city manager, nope, we're not doing it, kind of the same thing. I believe City Manager Sweet did meet with Parkstone and has open lines of communication. Clete, you have as well. I have offered for them to come to the table and have conversations. I don't believe the gates were closed in the way that they're permanently closed. I believe they're open and we can have conversations. I believe whether we partner, help, do something, there is running water. We know that. So to the least of that extent, we have to help them somehow. Whether we have them pay for it, we pay for it, there's something there with the water. And I think that's where you were going with this, is there's something there with the water. What is its value to us as a city overall? The gates are back open. The conversation is back open, right? So let's at least keep that line of communication open. You won't get to speak, Bob. You won't
During
get to
public
speak.
input. Public input takes place.
Not right now, wrong time.
Hold on.
Yes, Commissioner.
I think, Scott, you explained it better than I've heard it explained this entire time while we were having some other chatter in the audience. But I've heard the liability issues. I've heard a lot of those. But what I haven't heard is that we're still going to be using the water just from the reclaimed plant. My question is there's been attempts to repair that plant in the past that didn't work. So that's one of the reasons why we're still having this conversation about Parkstone and the well. So what is the likelihood that it's going to actually get fixed this time and we're going to actually be able to use it? Because then we will be using the water. It just won't be coming directly from the well source itself. It'll be pumped in.
Yeah, and I think great question. So just to touch a little bit on I'll call it kind of the circular description. We weren't involved in how that permit was written. It was very peculiar how that permit was written, but I think the district was nicely saying, hey, this water's going in down here on average. Mm-hmm. We'll let you pull a certain amount over here as almost an offset, right? So it is being used in some fashion right now via a paper permit, right? I won't get into the details beyond that. To directly answer your question as far as the intake itself and the structure, we had, as part of that study and analysis, part of our scope was to kind of really go through that system and figure out why it could not perform. And to be frank with you, the majority of the issue is the intake itself.
Yeah, sediment, right?
The river is very shallow. I know there's a lot of issues with the design. I'm not here to pick on anybody, but when you look at the intake level and the seasonal level of the river, when you need the water is when the river's the lowest, right? Just like everything around here. It's just that time of the year is dry. So the intake is essentially down in the muck, right? And I know Lake Jessup as a whole has a muck problem that's a bigger picture beyond the city's control thing. So that intake design, we were looking at specifics of that, also looking at the filter systems themselves, how they were staged. When you start pulling in that dirt, it quickly blinds the filters off, the filters in this dew loop. And just so you know, I used to work for a filter company, so that's why I got involved highly in that. And the filters kind of in this constant backwash and can't keep up with the process, right? So that was the pieces that were being looked at. We actually had testing scheduled for the week Hurricane Ian hit. Obviously, the hurricane hit, it flooded. Panels have been fried, frankly, since then electrically, and we've been unable to complete the testing. But we believe it is achievable and can be overcome with improvement to the intake design and some filtration stages improvements that can be operational. Now, at what level? I think there was discussions of at what flow rate. There's a rating for the plant, how it's permitted. Are we comfortable with that rate? And it may become more engineering analysis. Do we kind of derate the facility initially to not spend multi-million dollars? Can we spend maybe, like you said, $1 or $2 million and get it back up and running at a reduced rate, but that gets you by with your reclaim supplement needs, right? And certainly those factors, I really can't answer them yet, but those were the pieces we were looking at.
Thank you.
So you say the issue is the filter and the intake. But if we just had a pipe from the artesian well, would that satisfy and solve all the problems?
Not all of them. And again, this goes back to what we were touching on earlier. The seasonality of that intake is the biggest challenge, right? If we had an infinitely large tank and we could fill that tank 365 days and then use it 3 months of the year, that would solve the problem. Essentially, the river is our tank, right? We're dumping into Lake Jessup and then pulling the water when we need it by permit. That's how the district's looking at it, more of an average. It may solve a little bit of the problem because when you're pulling off at a much higher flow rate, right? We all use our irrigation between midnight and 8 a.m. in the morning. And for those 3 months, it's very seasonal and very highly driven, right? So while if it's a couple hundred gallons a minute would help contribute to it, it would not likely solve the peak demand. So you're still going to be pulling off the river, right? So maybe you can blend it and dilute it a little bit from that. Maybe it helps a little bit with the filters, but like I said, it doesn't necessarily guarantee us a solution.
And the dry season, you said it was 2 or 3 months. Isn't it November to May? Isn't it longer than that?
It is, but really the timing, and this is not just for the city, it's for everybody. When we see peak challenges, it's that onset of that long dry season along with spring, right? So if you look at even rivers and streams, right, the groundwater peaks, I guess I would say October-ish, right? Hurricane season, rain peaks. And then things continue to go down, but you'll look at people's lawns and irrigations tend to start hitting more and more water come springtime, right? So really that March to April when things are growing is when everybody really wants that reclaim, that irrigation timers and stuff are picking up, people bumping up irrigation times because it becomes more and more dry. The groundwater's gotten more dry since over basically the winter period. But spring is consistently that demand where we see that kind of spikes the demand for the system.
And so, am I doing the math correctly? For the Lake Jessup augmentation plant, it says design capacity 0.25 MGD. So would that be 250,000 gallons a day?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the permitted number. I think it's permitted for a higher number if I recall.
Permitted for 0.3, but
Yeah.
the pumps added can only do 0.25.
And so, if we did have a pipe, you couldn't just sometimes let it go into Lake Jessup and sometimes pipe it to the reclaim plant?
You could, but keep in mind that permitted value is an average, right? So you might, just like any water systems, you might have one day where you use 0 and another day where you, or maybe 3 or 4 days where you use 0 and a day where you use 1 million gallons, right? So there's that average number is over the course of the year, and when you hit that springtime is when really you use it. So you might be using it at a much greater amount for, say, the month of April, right?
Do you see a liability if we were to pipe it?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah, and again, we don't know what we don't know, right? And I think part of the look was understand, is it a well or is it a fracture, right? If it's a well and you can theoretically get to a casing that's buried and broken off well under the ground, still a risk. Maybe you have a better potential of capturing that flow or stopping the flow, right? If it's a fracture in the ground and you try to, say, inject concrete or do something to stop the fracture, it's likely going to pop out somewhere else downstream. And that's where the risk, I think, really comes into play. And like, again, we just don't know at this point, from our perspective, any more than some historical data. But I will tell you, some conversation we've had with some folks at the district, there's a lot of people that believe it's a fracture because there's no historical data of a well that was there. But we all know it's hard to dig up some of that history.
If it is a fracture, could we use the piping?
You could probably carry it like it is, but it wouldn't change that structure. You could pick it up as it's falling into the river, you know, say put a lift station there and pump it over. That could be a consideration, but I would not recommend touching the fracture itself in that scenario.
So don't pipe from the artesian well fissure to the Lake Jessup augmentation plant, which I saw budgeted about $30,000 for a pipe. That would not be in your best recommendation.
No, and again, we don't know what we don't know, but I would think there's a lot of risk in either scenario in trying to pipe that because there's nothing to physically connect to, right? That's a guarantee you're going to capture it short of putting some other structure downstream to intercept it.
And when you talked about Parkstone, you said something about a reclaimed cup. Did I misunderstand?
No, you're correct.
So we have a potable cup and we have a reclaimed cup.
It's specific to the permit for the Lake Jessup intake. So that water is already factored into the permit with the district for
Okay.
that intake specifically.
Okay. But you don't agree that the Parkstone cup had anything to do with the potable water cup?
Correct.
Even from 2005 records, you don't see that?
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but I believe there's two things that are happening here. First thing, biggest problem is the liability. That seems to be overall what everybody's issue is with Parkstone water. That's clear. Second thing is, I think you're saying it's safer to let it run into Lake Jessup and then take it out as it comes.
With what I know today, yes.
Okay, I understand that. Mayor, in those documents, in any of those reports, does it say anything about the amount of water that comes out? Somebody had to do some kind of measurement.
500,000 gallons a day.
Say again?
500,000 gallons a day.
That's the approximate guess?
Yeah, that is, I believe, was what was presented to the county.
And I'll just add
And
that,
again, you will all have this document. I'd really recommend that
Yeah.
you read the engineer's study that was presented to the Board of County Commissioners.
a lot of that data has been based on estimates, but
Why haven't we seen that yet? Why is it just coming to us now?
Because they did not want the city of Winter, because they gave us a cease and desist order. We're not allowed to set foot on there.
No, but the
And
county email from Jacobs Engineering, that'd be great to see.
I just sent it to you. It's something that I went out and found myself.
Oh, great.
This conversation keeps going. The former own opinions, I'm not against assisting when we have common goals. I just want to make sure everybody understands the real history and the documentation of what the history is here.
So the problem is, and I believe a lot of the residents probably think the same way I did when I first saw the well. You know, the normal person is just like, just put something there to catch the water and send it where it's got to go. I get it. You know, there should be some kind of education for the residents of Parkstone to really make them understand what we're doing and what the liability is as opposed to just letting it flow into Lake Jessup. I think that's something that should be done.
We've been trying for years.
Well, I think we can try to get some good communication. We know who we have to communicate with. They hear it. So I'm not an expert on this at all. I just see what I see. I see that the water's coming out. It's a lot of water. You know, like Commissioner Bruce said, you know, why can't we just put a pipe there? You know, I understand there's a lot of things with it. You know, we're not actually sending pipes into the ground, it's just something to catch it, you know.
Please, I would recommend, and I have it here, and again, you will all now have it, but look at this diagram and the way that fissure has moved and how it runs between the house and that pool, and where that runs, if we touch that, we own it. And the damage, it's already sunken and attempts to been repaired. And
We're not actually touching it, we're just
Yeah, if we
talking
can
about
take it
putting a pipe
from-
there to catch it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where it's coming out. That's a really good argument. And I think we need to leave it alone, but then try to work with using the water.
I get it, you know, the
Let's
concrete.
get back to
The
this as well.
concrete formation that's there, you know, I could see what a lot of people are saying. Just
I
put a
understand.
pipe there and catch it.
So we hit the 11 o'clock,
We'll keep working with Bob and
right, which is we're right, heading for, right? We said 11 o'clock was,
That's correct.
so we're good with round one?
yep,
Do you want to take 5 minutes and then?
or we can plow on.
Let's pile. I'm good.
Yeah, let's move on?
Yeah.
Yep, let's keep moving.
Okay, thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Mayor, if you want to send me the email you sent to Christian, I can send it
Oh, okay.
to everybody. Christian's on
have it.
vacation.
Oh, you already have it?
No, I don't.
Yeah,
I was saying
Christian's
I don't
out
have it
this
yet,
week.
or I would have sent it already out.
You should send it to me, I'll forward it to everyone.
Thanks.
Mayor and Commissioners, as we discussed at the beginning, our second part of this workshop is going to give you an update on the design and construction progress made on the East Water Reclamation Facility. And we've got Scott and Mira and Eric will be presenting that to you.
I sent that to the city manager.
All right, good morning again. I'm back, Scott Richards, Carlo Engineers. Didn't expect to be up here earlier, but good to see everybody again. So again, this component of the meeting is really focused on the wastewater plants, which we know is always the elephant in the room. Really, just to give you a quick agenda, I'm going to make this pretty brief here. I know we gave a more thorough presentation last time. We're going to give really a recap of the facility. It's a little bit repetitive of what you may have seen, but just for anyone listening out there, wanting to be aware of the background. Then we're going to really focus on the east wastewater plant updates, because that's been the focal point. Talk about some funding design updates, and then Eric with Wharton Smith is going to come up and give some more detail about construction and some of the early cost estimates. So again, most of you know, but just so you understand, the east facility and west facility, the city has two plants. One on the east located near Sam Smith Park, and the other one on the west side off of 434. You can see the images of the aerial shots of the two plants on the right. We are focusing today on the east plant, and that has been our priority from a design perspective, but again, very similar plants in nature. Both of these, what we call ring steel type package plants, so we often call them, maybe being inappropriate, but in our world we call them kind of developer plants at the time when communities were installed 40, 50 years ago. There was no treatment plants. Developer would often put up a plant very quickly, get in, get out, and again, this is how the technology was back then for these plants, but they don't last when you mix steel with wastewater. A lot of challenges come with that. Again, these were built in the 70s and 80s, so they're approaching their end of their useful life, and as Cleet noted earlier, really frankly, these are past their useful life. I'm actually heading from this meeting to the East Plant to look at something today, for instance. So with the challenges, along with the design, really we touched on before, these are what we call a single train process, right? So when water goes in that plant, it kind of runs around the circular pattern and then through the clarifier in the center. The challenge with them, again, if you have any point along the way has a problem, that whole plant or half of the plant, because you have two at each plant, effectively is out of service, right? So that's one of the bigger challenges too, that if you have a problem, you go from 100% capacity to 50% capacity almost immediately. So that is a common challenge with these. So as we look to the new facilities, they're not designed that way, right? We're looking at concrete, proper coatings, materials, stainless piping where it's necessary, trying to do the right stuff to make sure they run for much longer into the future. But also we call them multiple trains, right? So we kind of decouple that process. So you'll see in the next aerial how it's spread out differently, and that's really to give you that reliability in the future. And that's really part of the new permitting requirements as well as we look to. So to give a little bit more detail, I know this is hard to see, but this is straight out of our CAD layout of the current east plant. We're focused on the east. The west is going to follow soon thereafter. We've got through the preliminary design engineering. We're in design. That was, the preliminary and design report was done in February of this year. The permit was applied for and received in March of this year, so we have a permit to construct the plant. And really now, and one of the keys for us this month and really over the next week and a half, is going to be the SRF application documents, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Just so you can see, I know it's difficult to see, but on the image on the right, the bottom right corner is the current plant. The reject pond, which is on the bottom there, we're basically building it towards the back, in parallel to that pond is where the new plant will be constructed. And I think one of the keys that we've continued to focus on with these plants is we don't want to build a new plant to the extent we can on top of the current plant, because it becomes a challenge to keep one plant in service while you're building the new plant. And that also adds a lot of risk and frankly cost because of that timing and phasing. So we've really focused on this area. I will say, and I think Mrs. Bruce, you brought it up last time, we have laid this out in an area based on the survey and our ecological team that avoids for the pretty much the most part any wetlands impacts. That has been a key focus for this plant because certain portions of the site are designated wetlands, and that's what kind of controlled some of this layout of the site is based on that, avoiding wetlands impacts. So the funding obviously is a big focus for both facilities, and the timing of that really is what drives the city's ability to move forward with construction. Just to give a little background, the commission here in 2022 actually approved the design loan application through Clean Water SRF. That was received in the end of 2022, and that is being applied to, along with the ARPA dollars, towards the design of the plant. So that was a bit of a strategy move from the city at the time to make sure that we're in line with SRF so they know the project's coming, and was really setting up for what we're at now, right? So now we're applying for the construction SRF portion. So that application package is actually in their hand as a draft. They're reviewing it. We're getting some comments back this week and early next week. And that final package will have to be in their hands by June 30th. So this is the application period for what we call the first quarter of FY26. So SRF works on a quarterly basis. The applications are required now for October 1 money, just to be clear. So it would go in now. SRF has a meeting in mid-August where they approve the funding, and then develop that what they call priority list. And then October 1, that funding would be available to those that are approved. So that's kind of this process takes a while, is kind of my point, right? You're thinking months in advance to be able to get that loan approved. And that's based on, this is specific to the east plant, then we can follow through the west. But there are limits on the money they'll give you per year, but you're applying for the entire cost or projected cost of the plant in this application. I will add we continue to monitor for grant funding potential. There's actually two things that are very imminent, which we are very much pushing on here. Again, no promises, but we're trying our best to see what we can get out of these. The first, which is some very recent news, has come out from appropriations specific to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. This really just got announced by DEP in the past month. It is going to go through the SRF program, but may allow for some loan forgiveness portions of the loan. So I don't want to show too much excitement, but we're very excited about the potential, and the team is working hard to get that in. The good news is we already had basically the plant ready to go for the application. We're going to append that with some additional data. So we're hopeful that something works out of that to help offset some cost. There's also another loan grant potential called Protecting Florida Together. This is focused on water quality. This is, I think the application window opens up in July, and that is due in late July, if I recall. So our team is also preparing to apply for that grant. So good timing for a few of these things, but we're hoping they work out. And again, I don't want to promise any numbers, but our team is really working to focus on those 2 items. So with that, as I touched on, the next submittal date is June 30th, so that's coming very quickly. Some of the requirements for that, just to touch on, the loan application, which is in review, the design plans specifications also submitted for review. The permit is required to be in hand, and that was completed in March. And then they also want an initial cost estimate to go with that documentation, and Wharton Smith has been helping us with that, and we'll be presenting that shortly. So with that, I will let Eric come up and give his portion, and then we'll both be here for questions as you have them.
Morning, Eric Anderson with Wharton Smith. I'm going to touch on a couple things that I presented the last time I was up here, but wanted to focus on just kind of giving an overview of the process, what to expect out of the cost transparency, and what the next 6 months will kind of look like. So part of our responsibility is to put together a guaranteed maximum price for the city. It's often referred to as a GMP, so you'll hear me use that term. And so the question is how do we develop that? We do that through an open book process. So that involves bidding out each individual component of the project, so that whereas you may be used to seeing a project bid come in, and that bid is one number from your contractor. I think last meeting you may have approved some stormwater cleanup stuff. So you're used to seeing one number come in from that contractor. The GMP process differs because we're presenting the backup to every single number, how every single component of the project is compiled. So for example, you'll see the electrician's cost, which will be bid out amongst multiple bidders. You'll see concrete, so on and so forth. The part of what we do is a GMP design review. So we're reviewing the design in conjunction with Carollo, coming up with ideas, making sure that we're vetting out that it is, that we can address any questions that might come up during the process. Part of our responsibility is also to develop those GMP bid manuals. So for every item of the project that is bid out, we put together a comprehensive bid manual so that when we're reviewing those bids that come in, we're reviewing them apples to apples. We know that the 2 bidders are including the exact same components. It is a very competitive bidding process, so we're advertising, we're soliciting multiple bids, we have a set bid date where bids are due to us, and then we're responsible for reviewing those bids for completeness. Again, all part of that guaranteed maximum price package. The final assembly of that guaranteed maximum price is going to include, of course, a breakdown of all of those bids received, the general conditions and general requirements costs for the project. It's going to include a risk register, which I will go into more depth on, and of course provide the schedule and then any clarifications that are needed to help approve this GMP. And you'll see within the general conditions or within the process, you're going to see subcontracts, purchase orders, any allowances or contingencies. Again, I'll review that with the risk register process. The general conditions, so those are the costs of having a superintendent on site, construction trailers, water, power, all those components. You get to see every single line item there. And of course, the bond, that's the payment and performance bond that's required by Florida state statutes. And then, of course, any insurances, so that'd be your builder's risk insurance and general liability insurance. And then, of course, the negotiated fee, which includes our home office overhead. So risk register, this is something that has become much more important over the last few years. Of course, you're all familiar with all of the additional risks that have come with the projects, with the tariffs, with COVID, project delays, and so we like to address those head on. we create a comprehensive tool, which you're only seeing a couple line items of, but basically identifies the potential risk, the potential cost associated with that risk, the likelihood that we're going to see that risk, and what's most important with this document is our risk mitigation techniques. That's where we can work with the city, we can work with Carollo to, as we move through the entire process, I'm going to say eliminate those risks through our mitigation strategies. And now in some cases with contingency items, things like permits, we know that we're going to have to pay permits. But unfortunately, a lot of the regulators won't tell us what those permits are going to cost until we're much further in. So that way we use those allowances so the city's paying to the exact penny what those permits cost, not a penny more. But basically, we use this risk register to generate those lists of contingencies and allowances. We've actually started that with the estimate that we've provided. And one of the goals is to work through till we get to that GMP process to identify those risks, quantify them, add them into project direct costs so that we can bring those contingency amounts down. So for the SRF deliverable, we've provided an estimate, and you're going to see that we've provided a very broad summary on the next page, but it's going to show you what the direct costs. So those are all the materials associated with actually building the plant. So that's going to be your piping, your concrete, your electrical, the components of the project that remain in place. Then you've got your general conditions costs. Again, that's your project staffing, the temporary on-site facilities, and so forth. You've got project contingency, which again, it comes directly from the risk register. We've got escalation contingency. This is a really tough one right now because every single day it seems like something's changing with tariffs and escalations. So we try and take our best guess at it during this estimating phase as to what it could potentially look like when we do bid out the project. And then again, you're going to see those bond, insurance, and fee line items. So some key takeaways. This is our high-level summary. The estimate that we've currently put together is just over $71 million, including all contingencies and allowances. We do like to highlight that if you pull those contingencies out, we're right around that $60 million mark. Historically, we see the final project GMP come somewhere in between those two numbers. Again, this being an estimate, we're trying to focus on what are those bookends. And so for the purposes of the SRF deliverable, we're providing them that $71 million number. A couple takeaways, based on the size of the plant, we typically look at things in terms of dollars per gallon of treatment. And our estimate has come up, we've backed into that number, and this number right now is right in line with the rest of the industry. Everything we're seeing of current projects, the cost for this project is very consistent with what we're seeing throughout the state. We're going to continue to move now towards the GMP bid phase, which is going to entail looking at those design components. Where can we provide additional value engineering? Sometimes people hear the word value engineering and they interpret it to mean, oh, we're just cutting out project scope, and that's not the goal. The goal is to find ways to be more efficient with what we're doing so that we can provide the same quality of project and reduce capital costs. We also are looking at the same time at overall O&M costs moving forward. We don't want to make a decision today that decreases capital costs, but will ultimately increase O&M costs for the next 20 years. We typically would see that, again, as we are addressing those risk items from the risk register, that some of those contingency numbers will come down as we move towards the GMP phase. And then we anticipate moving into that GMP phase at the very end of this year, where we'll start issuing those bid packages and getting those bid out for competitive bids. And that's back to Scott.
So this is just a highlight. I think you guys saw this last time we were here. This is showing the schedule. So this is specific to the East Plant. Again, we're here about mid-2025 now with that SRF application that's going in. That construction and funding approval is expected October 1 timeframe as far as funding. And then the goal really is to come back with that final GMP later in the year based on that process. So with that, we think one of the keys, and again, procurement and lead time of materials remains a challenge. So we're hearing news, things may be getting better. I know Eric touched this morning on another new U.S. factory for some electrical equipment that's coming on board, and that stuff is very exciting because hopefully that brings not only lead times down, but brings more competition. So those are some of the pieces we continue to watch, but we've kept a pretty long window here for potential procurement of equipment. While some stuff may come in sooner, there's going to be a lot of equipment that may take up to a year to get. Generators, for instance, are one of the biggest challenges right now still, along with certain electrical equipment, can take upwards of a year to receive. So working with the CMAR, the goal would be to early procure some of those processes to keep us as much on schedule as possible. But based on this, we think reality is looking at a mid-next year construction beginning. And then just highlighting a little bit, again, this is kind of jumping a little bit further ahead as we touched before. Same schedule, but really attaching the West Plant to that. Again, this is still kind of big picture looking at that. You know, we're hoping to be in the design of the West Plant later this year. And then really that SRF funding is going to tie into that schedule for, you know, potentially, depending on grants and other things that come in, when can we then apply for that next SRF loan, which is really going to be the schedule that really drives the West Plant construction. And with that, that's it, and I'm sure you guys have questions, so we'll
What
be
would
here
give
if
you
you
that
need us.
impression?
Yeah, right.
I could start, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Please.
So, Scott, when do you think we could actually get a cost of these plants totally? When? Eric?
Looks like it's right there.
There it is, right?
So
No.
both
No.
plants combined?
No, both plants
Yeah.
total from the ground up. You're saying both plants, $60 million.
That's one.
No.
That's one.
That's
That's one plant.
That's what I'm
71
I'm
million.
asking, both
Yeah.
plants, ground up, total cost.
With the money that we've already put into it as well, or?
You
Yeah.
could say that, 'cause
Yeah. Look,
or when, maybe possibility, approximate time frame.
I'm going to let Eric add to this, but I'll give you from our perspective. Costs continue to be challenging, right? And personally, I think the personal opinion, the inflation seems to be calming down, but these tariffs and other things are throwing a lot of challenges out there to price things out. And I know we've had a lot of direct conversation with Wharton Smith. I think they've been great to help pull this together quickly, but there's a lot of unknowns that still affect these costs, right? So I think this range today is the best we have as of today, right? And how things change 6 months from now, I don't know. But I do think that we as a team feel that this range is reasonable based on the current market conditions. Now, the challenge comes into the West Plant if we're 2 years out and procuring components for the West Plant. You can factor escalation or inflation or whatever we want to call it onto those costs, but it's based on market assumptions, right? And that's a challenge. Now, I would say design-wise, apples to apples, they're very similar plants, right? So what you're looking at in the east and looking at the west component-wise should be very similar in nature. But I can't say, and I would rely on Eric to add to that, what those costs look like 2 years from now.
So, I just lost my train of thought. Hold on. Go ahead.
All right, I'll add, can I add to that? Is it really?
Sure, and then we'll go on to Commissioner
So,
Bruce.
I'm going to add a couple things to that. Scott, you and I met January, I believe, of '23. At that point, we were talking 100 million. Here, we're between 120 and 140 million 2 years later, right? If anybody's looking at this and going, what's reality? That's reality. That's 20% to 40% is where we're at, okay? My question for you as we take a look at this, design workshops will take place and reduce cost and improve efficiency will occur over the next 5 months. How so? That's the slide right here, third bullet down. How are we going to take place, reduce cost and improve? How?
So there's obviously a reasonable limit to what we can do.
Right, that's what I'm asking.
And so I will tell you as a team, Cleet, Eric, Carollo, Kimley Horn, we've had active meetings on a lot of subjects, right? Everything from the site, right? How can we phase this? Geotechnical information, right? Trying to get geotechnical information to go, if we're going to build a structure, you've got to have the proper force that the soil can handle, right? So Wharton Smith's trying to bring in factors on, do I need to bring in backfill or can I use the native soil that's on site, right? And that can have that could be $500,000, right? So we're looking at these big things that have these swings, right? That's just one example. I will tell you a little bit ahead, we are looking at some process changes that maybe I'm getting ahead of myself and Erica will kill me, but we're looking at some optimization of the process, frankly, at the end of the day, to minimize concrete. Because the cost of concrete, cost of steel, cost to stand that up can get pricey, right? And we're looking at labor and time in the field. Can we make some optimizations to the layout to reduce that, but also not take away from the effectiveness of the plant, right? So there's ultimate goal. We don't want to build what you have today because in another 30 years, we'll be back here having the same conversation. Want to keep that reliability, and there's certain things we will not sacrifice because that's the long-term cost for the city. But if we can make some changes to the process, equipment, we even have conversation about prefabricated structures versus poured in place in the field. We had some meetings on the lift station that's out there. I will note this does include the master lift station replacement, which originally was separately budgeted. New master lift station for the site. We actually met with Wharton Field directly, out with Wharton Smith directly to talk about construction means and methods, right? How you install that wet well and how you build that could have a $500,000 to $1 million impact on the project. So those are I'll say it's very much means and methods driven. We're really trying to work with them to optimize some of that construction ability and how we schedule it. And that to me is the benefit of the CMAR, because if we just designed it, this top-notch plant, and then we bid it, we're kind of stuck with the number. Here, we can at least work with them and say, okay, we see where we're at. What can we do? Tell us about these. Tell us who's available, contractors, subcontractors. What can we do to optimize some of those costs?
Commissioner Bruce?
Is one of the disadvantages of having a CMAR that we have to pay sales tax and we're not tax exempt?
No, I don't think that's the case on that. Eric.
No, that's not, the case is actually, in fact, what we will do is help you administer an owner direct purchase program. So any of the major equipment, what we'll do is we'll work with the city to issue POs for that, and we'll save all of the cost on all of the major single shipment items. Yeah, we foresee some significant sales tax savings.
Wonderful, but you still think about 565,000 we can't get around?
So when we put together the estimates, we don't account for sales tax savings. We assume we're paying the full sales tax amount, and then when we do go to the final GMP, we will account for those sales tax savings.
Great, thank you.
Are we in a position where we can get ahead of everything with tariffs and then start ordering material and supplies to try to?
I think we're getting close on some items, but again, the SRF process and the funding application really controls when we can start purchasing things. We've already had meetings with, say, our electrical team to try to identify preliminary costs and generators, right? That's a big item, and they take a year to get. And to your point, the sooner you can get ahead of that, the quicker you get it, and maybe the less risk you have on price. So I know we've been working with Wharton Smith, already develop a list, kind of that risk register, right? But specific products that we think are at risk. I mean, we're even going as far as, we'll typically specify equipment that's in the range, but working to try to openly look at what manufacturers are available, which ones may be lesser impacted by tariffs, right? What factories are being built, how can we line up to make sure that we're not putting the city, right? I'm not gonna specify a Toyota if the Honda can provide the same quality, right, for better words, and we're gonna make sure we're keeping it as open as possible to get more competition for pricing of equipment.
Okay. And the DEP gave us a time frame when to have the plants built. Do you think we could at least have one plant built, possibly both? And if not, maybe Anthony would have to answer the question of what the repercussions might be if we don't meet it.
So to clarify a little bit, the DEP had initially put in some thoughts on that, but when we had a conversation with them in the final consent order, that was removed. When we had a meeting with them, they actually admitted that they just put it in because they thought they wanted to put a timeline and said, look, guys, the city is committed, but with so many things in the market, we don't want to be held on a time frame that could be impacted by other things, such as tariffs and wars and other things going on around the globe.
So it's not.
But I think, through CLEAT and the team, we remain actively open with DEP. I think Mira speaks with DEP about every other day on various topics, but we remain very open about the intent. In fact, DEP on this hand is SRF, and DEP on this hand is enforcement, right? So we're trying to make very clear to them, hey guys, one hand's helping feed us, one hand's kind of, keeping us in line. So we're trying to balance that and be open with them, like, hey guys, this is the goal. But to get this out of the way, we need to have the funding for the new plants. So that is a big, to me, open book from our perspective on communicating that timeline. Funding is the driver for that. If we had ability to get more funding sooner, that could push the schedule up. But based on DEP's current SRF program and limitations in dollars per year, our hands are kind of tied. Now, I think sort of some things out there with some of these grants, if we could get some significant grant pieces, that could really help us push things forward a little bit. So again, I don't want to jump too far on that because I think we're excited, but until we see where this goes, there's a lot of potential there that if some of these grants work out. We've also been told that this hurricane grant won't have the same cap. So if we can get some of that, and again, I'm jumping way ahead here, there may be an ability to get more money in 2026. So if that were the case, that would really help, to your point.
I guess if I can just comment is that I am disappointed, right? We're seeing that at 20%, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. I wasn't aware of that until really just the last day or two, and that's disappointing. But at the same time, I'm very encouraged to hear that there are opportunities for grant money or that ability to have loans forgiven could hopefully offset this, and we're right back where we kind of started, being optimistic, understanding there's no guarantees. But yeah, I appreciate the work you guys are doing. Yeah, this has been a heavy lift for the last really 3 or 4 years, trying to finally get to this stage. I'll tell you, and maybe for full transparency, I was a lot more involved in getting more day-to-day stuff early, 6 months ago, a year ago, because of the city manager issues that we're facing, and it was kind of an all hands on deck. And once Mr. Sweet has come on board, I've stepped back from although I went to Tallahassee, met with DEP and did a lot of work and sat through a lot of meetings and all of the roundtables with all of our partners, I have stepped back because that's not really the role I believe that the dais is supposed to be on, or even in my own. And so I've stepped back and kind of turned it all over, and they're running with it. And thanks. It's important work. Thank you for the work.
I'm not going to lie, that number hurts, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm not attacking Wharton Smith, right? They're looking at a lot of things. We're all looking at a lot of things. I think the toughest part being an engineer over the last 5 years is doing cost estimates, because every time you do one, the numbers change, right? And that's just the market. I think we're, as a team, trying to do everything we can to keep that on the lowest end possible, and we know there's a lot of pieces that go along with that, and there'll be a lot more meetings and updates that come along with this. But for us, we've all been on deck with these potential grant options. Wharton's helping us. We've got several folks on the team helping with this stuff, and I think for us that could be a huge opportunity. And may not get it, may get it, but we're not going to pass it up. Let's put it that way.
The most important is that we continue moving forward. this is not something we have a choice, we must do something about these plants, so we do need to move forward. Other,
Last thing, just last thing. As you know, and everyone else knows, I'm very critical of the plants. Let's just get that out of the way. One of the biggest problems I have is the long-term cost. You know, as we already know, we see what happened with the plants that we have now. You know, we're literally still paying for them, and we're probably going to continue paying for them until they're paid off. The long-term, that's a big concern as well. You know, how much further are we going to have to pay for these new plants when they're going to be obsolete and we have to replace them again? I know it's a long time from now, and all of us will probably be gone. So that's why I think about that. And, you know, that's one of the biggest problems that I have with the whole thing, is the generations to come and what it's going to cost us.
I'm confused by that because maintenance cost is going to be regardless, right?
Right.
actually it goes down with this
So
technology.
as we put new plants in, and we did not have a maintenance plan in place for the current plants, we had a replacement plan, we'll leave that aside. But now, once we come in, we should also have the annual maintenance, which is what the study's doing, what the stormwater increase will do. So theoretically, in an appropriate budget, at the 40-year mark, this would start to replace them. You gonna jump on that?
I'll let you finish. I didn't want to interrupt.
But in between, it's maintenance every single year, so we'll have two line
Right.
items. One is a
Right.
replacement line item, and one is a maintenance line item. And the cost should come down for the actual utilization of these. So there's three benefits I see in the long run if we do this budget properly. Just pick
Well,
up on
it's
what you-
it's also the yearly cost of a third-party vendor that we have to hire instead of in-house
No.
to maintain the plants.
That cost is the same as whether we would have the Iron Bridge option
No.
on this?
Let's not go there. Let's just end it there and
Okay.
go ahead.
I would just say, I think Commissioners, both great points, right? I hear you, right? Anything, I always go back to the car, right? You
Right.
got an old car, you're gonna put money in it. I think it's unfortunate now that we're all paying the price for decades of deferred maintenance. I'm not blaming anybody, right? This is just decades of, we see this, right? And these plants, how they were built, were not gonna survive no matter what you did, right? We see, there's still some of these around, and they're out there roll painting on rust over and over and over, trying to keep these things together. I will be at the East Plant in an hour from now looking at challenges, right? So this doesn't change with these plants. So I'm not here to blame anybody, but I think we had a lot of deferred maintenance, to your point. With any plant, you've got to have a maintenance budget to keep up with it, right? If you had a pipe, you have a maintenance budget to keep up with it, right? Pump stations, whatever may come with it. So there's certainly that piece. So the city's got to commit to that, to your point. I would say we should not be replacing these plants again in 50 years, right? If you concrete, stainless, the right pipes, you're going to replace pumps. You might have some improvements decades down the road and mechanical pieces especially. But, I mean, we could name, as a company, plants around the country that are over 100 years old that are still in service today.
Okay.
And with the right maintenance, yes, they go through rehab and processes, but to demolish them and start all over, I don't think my child should live to see that, to be honest, right? And so we should be looking at a very long term with these plants and not having to replace them. Improvements, yes, that's why they've been laid out the way they did, looking at potential expansion in the future, both quantity and quality, as we call it, right? So if AWT stuff comes in, other things that we're seeing that come into play, we can plan for that and implement that without having to build a whole new structure and demolish the one that's next to it, which is really the challenge of these current plants. You can't add on to them with any practical sense.
So with that statement, and if city manager, stop me if I'm out of turn, we can't add on to it, yet we're talking about that for the west plant right now, right? We're having a conversation as to land versus on that same 10 acres, right?
I think we're talking different terms but I hear your point. When I mean add on, I mean, if you were to take the current ring steel package plant and I want to
okay, I
add
get you.
another half MGD, it's not practical. Yeah, you can do it, but that's how they got there now. You have a pipe that comes in and you split the pipe and you kind of manage the flow, and it's not pretty.
I thought you meant
Right.
space. Okay.
Yeah, but point taken on that, yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Diagnostic imaging for, like Set a Vision provides?
Mhm.
Is that something that we can bring into our maintenance plan for our current and our future plans? To understand, what
Yes.
kind of sediment there is and,
So, yes. Now, I'll say to the current plants, I think we've had photos in the past. To say it nicely, and we joke internally, when you drain the plant, it looked like a beach, a very dirty beach, but it looked like the amount of sand and grit in the bottom of the plant was so much that it was basically taking away the treatment capacity of the plant, right? So when we get these challenges that come through, it's almost like the trick of your toilet bowl, and they say put a gallon piece in there to conserve water. We were basically doing the same thing in the wastewater plants. They were so full of sediment. I'm going back 3-4 years ago now. They were so full of sediment that the plants could not process properly, right? Now, with the rehabs that were done, all but one basin was actually emptied, and they literally physically dropped a bobcat inside the plant with a crane and scooped it out in buckets. I mean, we're talking dumpster loads that came out of the plants. To looking to the future, that is not an uncommon piece, and I'll say a lot of the grit and sediment that makes its way into the basins is because you don't have proper grit removal at the front of the plant. The new plants are designed with grit removal. So it doesn't mean sediment won't make its way into the basin, but it will take a much longer period for that to accumulate in the basin. I mean, even Orange County, the largest utilities in Central Florida, have sediment removal challenges that come up. Those coastal communities literally get sand from the beach that ends up in the plants because of how it makes its way in the system. But yes, I agree it can be part of the process, but with the design of the new plant, that sediment removal will be much a lesser concern than what it is today.
Will reclaim be coming from both plants or just one?
Both plants.
Both plants,
Yeah.
okay.
So both plants will, all the finished reclaimed water will go in the existing reclaim tanks. And that system and balance of the reclaim system remain the same as it is today. And that's one of the challenges we talked about last time, is if you move plants or rearrange things, now refeeding the reclaim network and how you're set up to structure the community also has to change along with it. So this would keep that water balance, for better words, of the reclaim system.
Good. Any other questions? Well, it sounds like we were right on time.
Mr. Mayor, I just have one question. Scott, does that total cost estimate account for replacement of a new belt press?
I don't remember if it's in that number or not. Yeah, I can answer that. We've accounted for a second mobile dewatering unit, utilizing the existing tankage that's there, but with some new hard infrastructure. That way you can have one MDU at each, mobile dewatering unit at each plant.
Okay, so having two of them available for both the east and west plant, one each.
Yes.
So it wouldn't have to be moved from site to site.
Correct, with the idea that in the event that you did have one go down, that they're both still mobile, so that then you could relocate, while the one is being repaired.
Thank you.
Is that the thing that we were renting that we talked about?
Yeah, still continue.
So they're gonna have-
That's the
we're gonna have-
sludge dewatering, the
Right.
belt press.
We're gonna have two new ones? Is that what it's gonna be?
Well, you have one rebuilt and one new one is the goal.
So aside from that, is there any other equipment that we're gonna have to purchase aside from the plants?
Nothing
Like
specific.
big ticket items?
Nothing specific I can think of specific to the plant. I mean,
That piece of equipment's very expensive, I believe.
750,000.
Right.
yeah. So the goal, and I'll just touch on this a little bit on the dewatering aspect, like I touched on about solids. They have that pulling the sludge out of the plant is a key process to keep that plant happy and treating water. If you allow that sludge blanket to back up too high in the plant, then the plant has more risk of getting upset, right? So that's where we've been looking at sizing and capacity, and long-term having those belt press alternatives helps you to press and keep things moving, especially if you have an oncoming storm or something like that, to get ahead of it.
I think you did mention that when we were back talking about that 110 million for the plants, it did not include the lift station at the east plant that is now included. What
Cor-
was the cost of that lift
Correct.
station?
That was originally in a separate CIP item. That was going to be separate item
What was
as
the
far as.
ballpark price with installation and all that?
Probably 3 million, 2 to 3 million.
3 million?
Yeah.
All right. That's a little bite. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, we're trying to get on these sites and do it right once, right? And not have multiple contractors, multiple challenges. We want to get in there and get it done and get it right. And so that's kind of that thought process, because ultimately, if we do everything and leave something left, it's going to cost more to come back in a year later and rebid something or do it separately. So that's really the thought process, is try to be efficient as we can about getting in and getting off the sites. So, and plus, community impact, right? We don't want to go in and just keep going. We want to get in, get it done, and move on.
Anything else? Well, on behalf of the entire dais and all of the residents, I'd like to thank the city staff, city manager for your leadership, Corollo, Kimberly Horn, all of you, Cleet, really, thank you very much. It's, Wharton Smith, excuse me, Eric, it's a partnership. We've got a lot of work to do. Thanks for all the work that you've done so far. Yeah? I'm sorry, we should do public input, by all means. Yeah, excuse me. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Any, we'll open it to, we have 2 people in the public. Anyone?
No.
Sir? Nice to see you, Art.
Art Gallo, 199 Andina Terrace. First, I want to thank the city for having this workshop. I thought it was very beneficial and put out a lot of good information. And most importantly, it allowed the DS to ask questions about the future of our utilities. There I go, breaking things. My only disappointment was that, and I think it was just a faux pas, so we'll move on, but the commission needs to have advanced copies of the brief, not a month in advance, but at least a day in advance so you can review this stuff. So I'm just going to chalk that out off to a faux pas. I want to give some feedback on water meters, because I did have my water meter replaced from an old analog. I think it was 23 to 25. As part of my pilot project that the commission granted me for using smart water-based systems, weather-based systems for smart controls for irrigation. So frankly, I didn't notice any difference between the old analog and the new digital. It'd be hard to see $3 or $7, but if you multiply that times 40,000, it might make a difference. So I don't know if it'll make a difference or not, but I didn't notice anything in my water bill, just a piece of info. Last thing I want to talk about is the Parkstone artesian well, or whatever you want to call it, because I did a lot of looking into this. And I spoke with I can't remember if this is in 23 or 24, but I did speak with St. John's, who at the time, his name was Clay Corsi. He's the Director of Division of Water Supply Planning and Assessment. And he told me to acquire a permit, you have to show demonstrated demand for the water and a need. And St. John's granted Winter Springs the CUP permit, which allows us to use the Parkstone water from the artesian well, but the city does not have access to the well because it's private property. Parkstone does not have a permit to use the water from the artesian well. This water is part of the Winter Springs Cup granted by St. John's. He also told me that Winter Springs has 2 cups, and you talked about that today, one for private public supply and one for reclaimed water. And I also want to read a sentence from and for those listening, the 9 January 2023 commission meeting where I presented a 23-page list of report on this. But basically, on 5 April of 2022, the senior hydrologist Doug Hearn stated in an email, and I'll quote, it's the 4th of 6 bullets, district staff measured the flow of the discharge point of 2 separate days in November of 2021 to be approximately 380 gallons per minute or 500,000 gallons per day. So I think that's what you said, Mr. Mayor. So I think that although the door may be open to talk to Parkstone about the use of this, I think the discussion that I heard, it's really not necessary because you're using it once it goes into the river. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallo. Mr. Commissioner? No? Okay, well then we will call this meeting, this very informative morning, to a close. Thank you all.